The finger painting was still wet when Sarah Chen heard the first gunshot. 23 5-year-olds froze mid-giggle, their small hands suspended over sheets of construction paper, rainbow smears of tempera paint dripping onto the linoleum floor of Sunshine Elementary's room 12. Sarah's body moved before her mind could catch up, a fluid motion that dropped her into a crouch behind her desk, while her right hand instinctively reached for a sidearm that hadn't been there for 3 years. "Miss Chen?" whispered Emma Martinez, a tiny girl with pigtails who always sat in the front row. "What was that noise?" Preparing and narrating this type of story took us long efforts and hard work, so if you are enjoying the story, please consider subscribing to our channel. Sarah's breathing steadied in 2 seconds flat, muscle memory from another life clicking into place like a weapon being chambered. Her eyes swept the classroom's windows, second floor, eastern exposure, good sightlines to the parking lot where parents would be arriving for pickup in 20 minutes. The gunshot had come from the south wing, maybe the cafeteria. Single report, small caliber, probably a .22. "It's okay, sweetheart," Sarah said, her voice carrying the same gentle tone she used for scraped knees and hurt feelings. "We're going to play a special game called Quiet Mice. Everyone needs to sit against a wall by the reading corner, as quiet as little mice. Can you do that for me?" The children moved without question, their trust in her absolute and heartbreaking. Sarah had spent 3 years earning that trust, 3 years learning to be the kind of person children instinctively ran toward instead of away from. She activated the classroom's lockdown protocol, sliding the deadbolt and pulling down the window shades with movements that were too practiced, too efficient for someone who was supposed to be nothing more than a kindergarten teacher who collected ceramic owls and drove a Honda Civic with a "Coexist" bumper sticker. Her phone buzzed against her hip. Principal Rodriguez's voice came through the school-wide intercom. "Lockdown procedures are now in effect. This is not a drill." Sarah's jaw tightened. She'd known this day would come eventually, the day her carefully constructed new life would collide with the skills that had once made her the most feared sniper in the 75th Ranger Regiment. Staff Sergeant Sarah Chen, 238 confirmed kills across 4 deployments in Afghanistan. The Ghost of Kandahar, they'd called her. The woman who could put a bullet through a quarter at 800 meters in a sandstorm. That woman had died 3 years ago when she'd walked away from the army and enrolled in a teaching certification program. Or so she told herself. "Miss Chen?" whispered Marcus Thompson, a boy whose father was deployed overseas with the Marines. "I'm scared." Sarah moved to the reading corner, settling cross-legged on the alphabet carpet she'd special ordered with her own money. 23 small bodies pressed closer to her, seeking comfort in her presence. She wrapped her arms around as many as she could reach, feeling their rapid heartbeats against her ribs. "I know, honey, but you're safe with me. I promise." It was a promise she'd never made lightly, not in Bagram, not in Helmand Province, and not here in suburban Virginia, where she thought the worst danger her students might face would be a scraped knee on the playground or a forgotten lunch. Through the gap beneath her classroom door, Sarah could see shadows moving in the hallway. 2 sets of feet, heavy boots that didn't belong to any teacher or administrator she knew. The intruders were moving methodically, checking each room. Professional. Organized. Sarah's mind cataloged her resources. 23 children to protect, a classroom on the 2nd floor with windows that faced the 30-foot drop, and nothing resembling a weapon except safety scissors and a 3-hole punch. In Afghanistan, she'd operated with a Barrett M82A1 sniper rifle, night vision equipment, and a team of rangers who'd follow her into hell without question. Here, she had finger paints and graham crackers. The footsteps stopped outside her door. "Story time," Sarah whispered, pulling the children closer. "Once upon a time, there was a princess who lived in a magical castle." The door handle turned. Sarah's hand moved to the ceramic owl on her desk, a seemingly innocent decoration that concealed a knife blade she'd hoped never to use again. Her fingers found the hidden release mechanism as easily as they'd once found the trigger of her rifle. The princess was very brave, she continued, her voice never wavering as the shadows under the door shifted, and she would do anything to protect the people she loved. 23 pairs of eyes watched her with complete faith, unaware that their kindergarten teacher was calculating angles, distances, and the exact pressure points that would drop an armed intruder before he could harm a single child. The handle stopped turning. Sarah's hand held her breath, her body coiled like a spring, ready to become someone she'd sworn she'd never be again, ready to kill. Because that's what love looked like sometimes, not finger paintings and story time, but a willingness to become a monster so that innocence could survive another day. The shadows moved away from her door. Sarah didn't relax. In her experience, the most dangerous moments came not during the storm, but in the eye of it, when people let their guard down and forgot that evil was patient, cunning, and always looking for the moment when protectors believed themselves safe. She continued her story, weaving a tale of brave princesses and magical kingdoms, while her mind mapped every possible escape route, every potential weapon, every way she could get 23 children out of this building alive. Outside, sirens were beginning to wail, but Sarah knew better than most that help was often too little, too late. She'd learned that lesson in a dozen firefights across Afghanistan, where split seconds determined who went home and who went into the ground. "What happened next, Miss Chen?" asked Lily Wang, a quiet girl who rarely spoke in class. "Next," Sarah said, her eyes never leaving the door. The princess remembered who she really was. Because sometimes, Sarah reflected, the most dangerous person in the room was the one nobody suspected, the kindergarten teacher, with gentle hands and a warm smile. The woman who read stories about friendship and painted rainbows with children who still believed the world was fundamentally good. The woman who had once been the angel of death in the mountains of Afghanistan, and who would become her again without hesitation if it meant these children lived to paint another day. The real question wasn't whether she could protect them. The question was whether she could live with herself after she did. Word count. Section 1. 1,089 words. The afternoon had started like any other Tuesday at Sunshine Elementary. Sarah had arrived at 7:30 a.m., an hour before the children, to prepare the day's activities. She'd set out the finger paints in careful rows, red, blue, yellow, green, and arranged 23 sheets of construction paper on the long tables where her students would create masterpieces that would go home in backpacks, eventually finding their way to refrigerator doors and proud parents' social media posts. The normalcy of it all had been a balm to her soul. For 3 years, she'd found peace in the rhythm of elementary education. Morning circle time, where children shared weekend adventures and lost teeth. Math lessons with counting bears and number songs. Reading groups where she watched young minds crack the code of written language. It was honest work, important work, the kind that built futures instead of ending them. Her classroom reflected this new identity she'd carefully constructed. Motivational posters lined the walls. Kindness matters. We are all different, and that's beautiful. Reading takes you everywhere. A cozy reading corner featured beanbags and a small bookshelf filled with picture books about friendship, adventure, and possibility. Her desk held personal touches, photos from school events, thank you cards from former students, and her collection of ceramic owls, a hobby that her colleagues found endearingly quirky. None of them knew that each owl was carefully weighted and balanced, modified with hidden compartments that contained items from her previous life. The knowledge felt like betrayal, but Sarah had learned the hard way that evil didn't respect boundaries or sanctuaries. A kindergarten classroom in suburban Virginia was just as vulnerable as a forward operating base in Kandahar province. Maybe more so, because here, people believed themselves safe. The children had been unusually energetic that morning. It was October, and the excitement of Halloween was building. During their morning meeting, several students had shared elaborate costume plans. Marcus wanted to be a soldier like his daddy, which had twisted something sharp in Sarah's chest. Emma planned to be a princess, complete with a tiara her grandmother was helping her make. Little David Kim, who struggled with anxiety, had whispered that he wanted to be Superman because Superman saved people. Everyone can be a hero, Sarah had told him, ruffling his black hair. Heroes come in all shapes and sizes. Sometimes the biggest heroes are the people who are kind when it's hard to be kind, or brave when they're scared. The irony hadn't been lost on her. She was teaching children about heroism while hiding her own complicated relationship with the concept. In Afghanistan, she'd been called a hero by some and a killer by others. The truth, as always, lived somewhere in the uncomfortable middle. Now, crouched on the reading carpet with 23 terrified children pressed against her, Sarah wondered if the skills that had made her a pariah in some circles might finally serve a purpose she could live with. Every life she'd taken in Afghanistan had been justified. Enemy combatants, insurgents, threats to American forces, and Afghan civilians. But justification and peace were different things entirely. The gunshot that had started this nightmare had been followed by silence, which was somehow worse than chaos. In her experience, silence meant planning. It meant someone was taking their time, being methodical. Random violence was terrifying, but often brief. Calculated violence was patient, thorough, and infinitely more dangerous. Sarah's phone vibrated with a text message. She glanced at it carefully, keeping one eye on the door. Principal Rodriguez, 2 armed subjects in building, police en route, keep children calm and doors locked. 2 subjects. Sarah processed this information automatically, her mind shifting into tactical mode despite her efforts to stay grounded in her teacher identity. 2 meant coordination, planning. It meant this wasn't a crime of passion or a mental health crisis that had spiraled out of control. Someone had planned this. The question was, why Sunshine Elementary? Why her school? Why today? In Afghanistan, she'd learned to trust her instincts when something felt wrong. Right now, every instinct she had was screaming that this attack was too organized, too deliberate to be random. Someone had chosen this place for a reason. Her gaze swept over her students' faces, 23 children whose biggest worries this morning had been whether they'd get chocolate or plain milk with lunch, and if they'd have recess despite the cloudy weather. Marcus, whose father was deployed. Emma, whose parents were going through a difficult divorce. David, who'd made tremendous progress with his anxiety this year. Lily, who just started participating in class discussions. Each child represented a family, a community, a future full of possibilities. The weight of their lives pressed against her chest like armor she'd once worn in the desert. Heavy, necessary, and impossibly precious. Sarah's fingers moved to the small cross she wore around her neck, a gift from her grandmother who'd raised her after her parents died in a car accident when she was 12. It was the only piece of jewelry she never removed, the only connection to her life before the military, before Afghanistan, before she became someone who killed people for a living. "Miss Chen?" Marcus whispered. "Is someone trying to hurt us?" The question hung in the air like smoke from a discharged weapon. Sarah looked into his brown eyes, so much like her own students' eyes in Kabul, where she had sometimes visited schools during humanitarian missions. Children who'd known war their entire lives, who flinched at loud noises and drew pictures of tanks instead of flowers. She'd sworn she'd never let American children feel that same fear. "I won't let anyone hurt you," she said, and meant it with every fiber of her being. "That's a promise." Outside, the wail of approaching sirens grew louder, but Sarah knew response times. She knew how long it took to assess the situation, establish a perimeter, and plan an entry. She knew how much damage could be done in those precious minutes when children were trapped with monsters, and there was no one coming to save them except a woman who'd once been a monster herself. The handle on her door began to turn again, more slowly this time. Sarah's hand closed around her ceramic owl. The door handle stopped moving, but Sarah didn't release her grip on the ceramic owl. She'd learned patience in the mountains of Afghanistan, where the difference between life and death often came down to who could wait longest without breaking position. Hunters understood this truth. The prey that moved first usually died first. The princess lived in her castle with all the people she loved. Every day, she practiced being kind and helping others, because that's what princesses do. It wasn't entirely a lie. For 3 years, Sarah Chen had practiced being someone else, someone gentle, nurturing, someone whose hands created art projects instead of ending lives. The transformation hadn't been easy or complete. There were still nights when she woke in a cold sweat, her body automatically reaching for weapons that weren't there, her mind cataloging exits and threats in her suburban apartment. There were still moments in the grocery store when someone dropped a can of soup and she'd hit the ground before her conscious mind registered that the sound wasn't incoming mortar fire. But slowly, incrementally, she'd built a new identity from the ground up. Sarah the teacher lived differently than Staff Sergeant Chen the sniper. She drove carefully, never speeding, never taking risks. She volunteered at the animal shelter on weekends, finding peace in caring for abandoned creatures who, like her, were learning to trust again. She attended yoga classes where she struggled to quiet a mind trained for hypervigilance. She dated occasionally, gentle men who worked in IT or taught high school English, men who'd never killed anyone and never asked too many questions about her past. The children in her arms represented everything she'd hoped to become. When Marcus shared stories about missing his deployed father, Sarah saw her own childhood loneliness reflected in his eyes. When Emma struggled with her parents' divorce, Sarah remembered her own confusion when her grandmother had to explain why Mommy and Daddy weren't coming home from the hospital. When David's anxiety made him cry during fire drills, Sarah recognized a kindred spirit, someone whose nervous system had learned to expect danger around every corner. Teaching had been healing in ways she'd never anticipated. Every book she read aloud, every math concept that finally clicked, every moment of wonder when a child discovered something new, these small victories felt more meaningful than any medal or commendation she'd received in the military. The lives she was building up seemed to balance, somehow, against the lives she'd taken down. Or so she'd told herself. The shadows under her door shifted again. 2 people, definitely moving in coordination. One posted outside while the other checked the handle periodically. Professional discipline. Sarah's mind drifted to the morning routine she'd developed over the past 3 years, the careful rituals that had helped her transition from warrior to teacher. She woke every day at 5:30 a.m., a habit from the military that she'd never been able to shake, and started with 20 minutes of meditation. Not the kind advertised in wellness magazines, but the practical meditation of someone learning to live with ghosts. She'd sit in silence and inventory her mind, acknowledging the memories that surfaced without judgment or resistance.
Afghanistan came back in fragments. The weight of her rifle against her shoulder, the way sand got into everything despite her best efforts, the sound of helicopters that meant either rescue or more danger. The faces of her targets, always through a scope, always at a distance, always reduced to tactical decisions rather than human complexity. She remembered the satisfaction of perfect shots, the mathematical beauty of ballistics calculations, the way her breathing would slow and her heartbeat would steady in the moments before she squeezed the trigger. Those memories lived alongside newer ones now. The smell of tempera paint and Play-Doh, The sound of children's laughter echoing through hallways, the weight of small bodies during storytime hugs. The pride she felt when a struggling reader finally sounded out a difficult word, or when a shy child found the courage to share during morning meeting. Both sets of memories were real. Both were part of her. After meditation, Sarah would make coffee and review her lesson plans, approaching teaching with the same meticulous preparation she'd once applied to military operations. She studied her students the way she'd once studied enemy positions, learning their patterns, their strengths, their vulnerabilities. But where she'd once gathered intelligence to exploit weaknesses, she now collected information to provide support. Marcus needed extra encouragement because his father's deployment had shaken his sense of security. Emma required gentle redirection when her parents' divorce made her act out in class. David benefited from advance warning about schedule changes that might trigger his anxiety. Lily responded best to one-on-one attention that allowed her to share her thoughts without the pressure of the whole group watching. Each child was a puzzle to solve, but the solution was always love in action, figuring out how to help them grow, learn, and feel safe in the world. Her apartment reflected this dual identity. The living room looked exactly like what it was supposed to be, the home of a young elementary teacher. Bookshelves lined with professional development texts and children's literature, a couch covered in papers to grade and lesson plans to review, photos from school events and thank you cards from grateful parents. But the bedroom told a different story. Her closet contained not just sundresses and cardigans, but also a carefully maintained weapons cache. Not because she planned to use them, but because 3 years of civilian life hadn't erased the bone-deep knowledge that evil existed and sometimes came calling when you least expected it. The ceramic owls throughout her apartment served dual purposes. Colleagues and friends saw them as a charming hobby, evidence of Sarah's quirky personality. In reality, each one was weighted, balanced, and modified to serve as either a weapon or a tool. The skills that had made her a lethal sniper hadn't disappeared. They'd simply been redirected into seemingly innocent objects that could become deadly in her hands if necessary. Sarah had hoped it would never be necessary. "What happened to the princess next?" asked Emma, her voice barely above a whisper. "The princess learned that sometimes being brave doesn't mean you're not scared. It means you're scared, but you do the right thing anyway." She thought about her first week of teaching, how her hands had shaken as she stood in front of 23 5-year-olds who looked at her with such trust and expectation. She'd spent months in teacher preparation courses, learning about child development, classroom management, and curriculum standards. But nothing had prepared her for the moment when a student looked up at her with complete faith that she would keep them safe, help them learn, and guide them toward becoming good human beings. The overwhelming responsibility had been immense. In the military, her job was clear: identify targets, eliminate threats, protect American forces. The rules of engagement were complex, but ultimately straightforward. Teaching offered no such clarity. Every decision affected developing minds and hearts. Every word she spoke became part of the foundation these children would build their lives upon. Sarah had thrown herself into the work with the same intensity she'd once applied to military operations. She attended every training workshop offered by the district. She stayed late to create bulletin boards and learning centers. She spent her own money on books, supplies, and classroom decorations. She studied each child's individual needs and modified her instruction accordingly. Slowly, she'd found her rhythm. The children responded to her calm presence and consistent expectations. Parents trusted her judgment and appreciated her attention to detail. Colleagues respected her work ethic and collaborative spirit. She'd built a reputation as the kind of teacher parents requested for their children: firm but nurturing, creative but structured, someone who could reach struggling students while challenging advanced learners. It had felt like redemption, in a way. Every life she'd ended in Afghanistan was balanced by a life she was now helping to flourish. The skills that had made her an efficient killer, patience, observation, precision, the ability to remain calm under pressure, translated surprisingly well to elementary education. But redemption, Sarah had learned, was never a straight line. It was messier than that, more complicated than simply changing careers and hoping the past would stay buried. The woman who'd once been the Ghost of Kandahar couldn't be completely erased, and there were moments when that was a blessing rather than a curse. Like now, when 23 children needed someone who understood violence intimately enough to recognize it, prepare for it, and, if necessary, meet it with overwhelming force. The handle turned again, more insistently this time. Sarah's grip tightened on the ceramic owl, her thumb finding the hidden release mechanism. The blade inside was ceramic too, undetectable by metal detectors, sharp enough to sever an artery, weighted for throwing accuracy up to 15 feet. She'd hoped she'd never need to use it. Hope, she'd learned, was a luxury that dangerous situations couldn't afford. The princess had a secret, Sarah continued, her voice never wavering even as her body prepared for violence. She had special training that helped her protect people, but she never wanted to use it because she believed there were better ways to solve problems. The door handle clicked. But sometimes, Sarah whispered, princesses have to make very hard choices. Through the small gap under the door, Sarah could see the shadows shifting as one of the intruders knelt down, probably trying to peer into her classroom. The movement was practiced, tactical. Someone with training who understood how to clear a building systematically. This wasn't a random school shooting by a disturbed individual. This was something else entirely. Sarah's mind raced through possibilities. Terrorism seemed unlikely. Sunshine Elementary wasn't a high-profile target. A targeted attack on a specific student or staff member was more probable, but that raised the question of why her classroom felt like the epicenter of the threat. In her 3 years of teaching, she'd been careful to maintain a low profile, to blend in completely with her suburban surroundings. But the military had taught her that the past had a way of finding you, no matter how far you ran or how carefully you hid. "Miss Chen?" Marcus whispered, his small hand finding hers. "I'm really scared." Sarah squeezed his fingers gently, the same way she'd once squeezed her rifle's trigger, with purpose, precision, and absolute commitment to the outcome. "I know, sweetheart, but remember what we learned about brave people? They feel scared too, but they don't let the scared feeling make their decisions." It was a lesson she'd learned in the hardest way possible. Her first kill in Afghanistan was a Taliban sniper who'd been picking off members of her unit from a rooftop in Kandahar. Through her scope, she could see him clearly. Young, maybe 19 or 20, with careful hands and patient eyes that reminded her uncomfortably of her own. For 30 seconds, she'd hesitated, paralyzed by the humanity she could see in his face even at 800 meters. The hesitation had nearly cost her teammate's life. The Taliban sniper had gotten off another shot, missing Corporal Davies by inches. Sarah's training had finally overridden her conscience, and she'd put a bullet through the enemy sniper's center mass with the kind of precision that would become her trademark. Afterwards, her commanding officer had pulled her aside. "Hesitation kills, Chen. Not just you, everyone counting on you. You want to keep your conscience clean? Transfer to the chaplain's office. You want to keep your people alive? Learn to live with the ghosts." She'd chosen the ghosts. Over 4 deployments and 238 confirmed kills, Sarah had perfected the art of compartmentalization. The woman who painted her nails and wrote letters to her grandmother lived in one mental space. Staff Sergeant Chen, who could drop an enemy combatant at over 1,000 yards, 1,000 meters in adverse weather conditions, lived in another. The trick was keeping the compartments separate, never letting one identity contaminate the other. Teaching had been her attempt to integrate those scattered pieces of herself into something whole and healthy. The patience required for long-range shooting translated well to helping struggling readers sound out difficult words. The observational skills that allowed her to spot enemy movement were invaluable for recognizing when a child was having a bad day and needed extra support. The steady nerves that had made her legendary in combat helped her remain calm when 23 5-year-olds had simultaneous meltdowns on particularly chaotic Mondays. But integration, Sarah was learning, was different from replacement. The woman who could kill with surgical precision hadn't disappeared when she became a kindergarten teacher. She'd simply learned to hide, waiting for the moment when she might be needed again. That moment had arrived. The door handle turned completely this time, but the deadbolt held. Sarah heard a soft curse from the other side. Male voice, American accent, definitely military-trained based on his controlled reaction to the obstacle. A civilian would have rattled the handle or kicked the door. This person was assessing, planning, looking for the most efficient way to gain entry. Sarah's free hand moved to her phone, quickly typing a text message to Principal Rodriguez. 2 armed subjects, military training, this is not random. Call FBI counterterrorism unit. She hesitated for a moment, then added, I have relevant experience, will protect children. It was the closest she'd come to admitting her true identity in 3 years. The shadows under the door disappeared, which meant both intruders were moving again. Sarah's tactical instincts kicked into overdrive, mapping their possible movements through the building. If they were professionals, they'd have studied the school's layout in advance. They'd know that room 12 was on the 2nd floor, eastern corridor, with windows facing the parking lot and a clear line of sight to the main entrance where first responders would arrive. They'd also know that kindergarten classrooms housed the youngest, most vulnerable students in the building. Sarah's jaw clenched. In Afghanistan, enemy combatants who targeted civilians, especially children, were prioritized for elimination. The rules of engagement allowed for immediate action against anyone who posed a threat to non-combatants. Those same instincts were screaming at her now, demanding action, demanding that she stop being a teacher and become a soldier again. But she had 23 children to protect, and going on the offensive would mean leaving them exposed. Miss Chen, David whispered, his voice shaking with the kind of fear that would leave scars on his memory forever. Are the bad people gonna hurt us? Sarah looked down at his face, round cheeks still carrying baby fat, eyes wide with terror that no 5-year-old should ever experience. In that moment, she saw every Afghan child she'd encountered during her deployments. Kids who'd grown up in war zones where violence was a constant possibility and trust was a luxury few could afford. She'd joined the military to protect American children from experiencing that kind of fear. Now, 3 years after hanging up her uniform, she was face to face with the same choice: become a warrior or watch innocents suffer. No, baby, she said, her voice carrying absolute conviction. I won't let anyone hurt you, any of you. It was a promise that would cost her everything she'd built in her new life. The moment she acted on her training, the moment she became Staff Sergeant Chen again, there would be no going back to being just a kindergarten teacher. The FBI would investigate. Her military records would be examined. Her carefully constructed civilian identity would crumble under scrutiny. But sometimes love required sacrifice. Sometimes protecting what mattered most meant giving up what you wanted most. Sarah thought about her grandmother, who died peacefully in her sleep 6 months ago, never knowing the full truth about what her granddaughter had done in Afghanistan. She thought about her yoga instructor, who'd praised her progress in finding inner peace. She thought about David Rodriguez from her Tuesday evening book club, who'd been working up the courage to ask her on a real date for months. All of it would disappear when this day was over. All of it was worth sacrificing to keep 23 children safe. Story time, Sarah said again, her voice taking on the steady rhythm that had once guided her breathing during long-range shots. The princess realized that sometimes when people we love are in danger,
We have to use all the tools we have to protect them, even the tools we wish we never had to use again. Through the walls, Sarah could hear movement in adjacent classrooms. Other teachers were following lockdown protocols, keeping their students quiet and out of sight. But Sarah's trained ear could pick up something else, the sound of systematic searching. The intruders weren't just looking for targets of opportunity, they were looking for someone specific. The realization hit her like incoming fire. They were looking for her. Somehow, someone had discovered that Sarah Chen, beloved kindergarten teacher, was actually Staff Sergeant Sarah Chen, the Ghost of Kandahar. Someone had tracked her down, pierced through 3 years of careful civilian camouflage, and decided that her past required accounting. The question was, who and why? Sarah's mind raced through possibilities. Former Taliban fighters who'd survived her operations and spent years planning revenge, mercenaries hired by families of her victims, government agents who decided that a sniper with her kill count was too dangerous to leave unsupervised, even in retirement. It didn't matter. What mattered was that they'd brought their war to her classroom, threatened her children, and made the mistake of thinking she was no longer a soldier. They were about to learn the difference between a kindergarten teacher who used to be a sniper and a sniper who was currently working as a kindergarten teacher. The distinction would be the last thing they ever discovered. The fire alarm began shrieking at exactly 2:17 p.m., its piercing wail designed to cut through any sound and demand immediate attention. Sarah's tactical mind processed this development instantly. The intruders were forcing an evacuation, herding everyone into predetermined kill zones. It was a classic military maneuver adapted for a civilian target. Create chaos, control movement, eliminate targets efficiently. 23 5-year-olds started to stand up automatically, conditioned for months of fire drills to line up at the door when they heard that sound. Sarah's voice cut through their movement like a blade. "Red light," she commanded, using the classroom management technique that meant freeze immediately. "We're still playing quiet mice. Everyone back to the reading corner." The children obeyed instantly, their trust in her absolute, even as confusion flickered across their faces. Fire drills were supposed to mean walking quickly to the playground, where they'd line up by class and wait for the all clear. The alarm kept shrieking, but Miss Chen was telling them to stay put. Sarah's phone buzzed with a text from Principal Rodriguez. "Fire alarm compromised. Do not evacuate. Armed subjects controlling exits." At least someone else in the building had tactical awareness. Sarah quickly typed back, "Copy. Children secure. Can you confirm number of subjects and weapons?"
The response came quickly. At least 3 automatic weapons. They knew about our lockdown protocols. 3 subjects, not 2. Sarah recalculated instantly, her mind mapping new scenarios. A 3-person team suggested serious planning and resources. They'd studied the school, compromised the fire alarm system, and positioned themselves to control evacuation routes. This wasn't revenge, it was an operation. Through her classroom windows, Sarah could see black SUVs surrounding the school parking lot. Not police vehicles, too grilly for law enforcement response, and wrong configuration. These were the kind of armored vehicles used by private military contractors. Expensive, well-maintained, strategically positioned. Sarah's blood ran cold as understanding dawned. Someone had put a bounty on her head, and they'd sent professionals to collect it. The kind of professionals who wouldn't hesitate to eliminate witnesses, including 23 kindergarten students who'd seen their faces. "Miss Chen," Emma whispered, "why isn't the alarm stopping?" "Sometimes alarms get broken," Sarah replied, her voice steady as she calculated angles of attack and defensive positions. "But we're safe in here, I promise." Her fingers moved across her phone's screen, typing a message she'd hoped never to send. "Emergency contact needed. Chen, Sarah M. Service number 123
1-45-6789, code BLACK, children in immediate danger. She sent it to a number she'd memorized but never used, a direct line to a Pentagon office that officially didn't exist, staffed by people who handled situations that officially didn't happen. If she was right about who was hunting her, she'd need resources that went beyond local law enforcement. The ceramic owl in her hand felt inadequate against automatic weapons and trained killers, but it was what she had. That, and 20 years of training that had made her one of the most lethal human beings on the planet. Sarah moved to her desk, keeping low to avoid the windows. Her fingers found the hidden compartments in 3 different ceramic owls, extracting items that looked innocuous but could become deadly in her hands. A letter opener that was actually a perfectly balanced throwing knife. A paperweight that contained a small explosive charge, not enough to bring down a building, but sufficient to create a distraction or breach a door. A stapler that had been modified to fire small projectiles with lethal accuracy at close range. These items were remnants from her military days, tools she'd hoped never to need again. But hoping and preparing were different things entirely, and Sarah had learned to prepare for scenarios that hope couldn't account for. The movement in the hallway outside her door had stopped, which meant the intruders were regrouping or preparing for a coordinated assault. Her experience told her they'd try to breach multiple rooms simultaneously to prevent teachers and students from barricading themselves effectively. Her phone buzzed with an incoming call from an unlisted number. Sarah answered without speaking. Ghost of Kandahar. The voice was male, American, professional. We need to talk. I'm listening, Sarah replied quietly, moving to position herself between the door and her students. Cooperation ensures minimal casualties. Resistance guarantees maximum casualties. You have 60 seconds to walk out of that classroom and surrender yourself, or we start eliminating children, beginning with room 14. Room 14 was Mrs. Patterson's first-grade class, 24 6-year-olds who were probably huddled together just like her kindergartners, trusting that their teacher would keep them safe. Who sent you? Sarah asked. Clock's ticking, Ghost. 50 seconds.
Sarah's mind raced through tactical options. Even if she surrendered, there was no guarantee these people would spare the children. Professional killers who used children as leverage rarely left witnesses behind. Her best chance, her only chance, was to eliminate the threats before they could carry out their plan. But that meant leaving her students alone and unprotected while she hunted 3 armed operators in a building full of children. 40 seconds, Ghost. Sarah looked at 23 faces staring at her with absolute trust. Marcus, whose father was deployed overseas, fighting people not unlike the ones currently threatening his son. Emma, whose parents' divorce had already shattered her sense of security. David, whose anxiety would be triggered by every loud sound for the rest of his life if he survived this day. Lily, who was just beginning to find her voice. Each child represented a family, a future, a collection of dreams and possibilities that deserved protection. 30 seconds. Sarah's training kicked in with crystalline clarity. In Afghanistan, she'd learned that sometimes the only way to save lives was to take them first. The math was brutal, but simple. Eliminate the immediate threat to preserve the greater good. I'm coming out into the phone. Don't hurt the children. She ended the call and turned to her students, her voice carrying the calm authority that had once directed rangers through firefights. Listen very carefully. I need to go talk to some people in the hallway. While I'm gone, you're going to play the most important game of quiet mice ever. No one moves, no one talks, no one comes to the door no matter what you hear. Emma, you're the line leader today. Keep everyone safe until I come back. 23 pairs of eyes watched her with complete faith.
They didn't understand the gravity of what was happening, only that Miss Chen was asking them to be brave. Sarah moved to her desk, palming the modified letter opener and tucking the explosive paperweight into her cardigan pocket. The stapler went into her other pocket, its weight familiar against her hip. The princess had to leave her castle for a little while. She was very, very good at her job, and her job was keeping the people she loved safe. Sarah's hand found the deadbolt. For a moment she hesitated, not from fear, but from grief. The woman who opened this door would not be the same person who'd been reading stories and teaching addition 5 minutes ago. Sarah Chen, kindergarten teacher, was about to die so that Staff Sergeant Chen could live long enough to eliminate a threat. She opened the door. The hallway was empty except for 2 men in tactical gear positioned at either end of the corridor. Both carried military-grade assault rifles, HK-416s, Sarah noted automatically. Professional equipment for professional killers. The man to her left spoke without lowering his weapon. Walk toward the stairwell, hands visible.
Sarah complied, moving with the measured pace of someone who understood that survival often depended on appearing cooperative while calculating the exact moment to strike. Her eyes tracked every detail, the positioning of the operators, the angles of their weapons, the distance to cover, the acoustic properties of the hallway that would affect how sounds carried to the classrooms below. "You're a hard woman to find, Ghost," said the second operator as she approached. 3 years of playing kindergarten teacher. Very convincing. "Who wants me dead?" Sarah asked, continuing to walk at the directed pace. "Someone with a very long memory and very deep pockets." They reached the stairwell, where a third operator was waiting, a woman with cold eyes and the kind of precision movement that spoke of Special Forces training. She wore a small device clipped to her ear, suggesting command and control capability. "Target secured on level 2, the woman spoke into her comm device. "Beginning extraction." Sarah's military instincts processed this information rapidly. They weren't planning to kill her here, they wanted her alive, at least temporarily. That meant interrogation, which meant someone wanted information she possessed. The question was, what information, and whether she could use their need for it to her advantage. "You made a mistake," Sarah said as they began descending the stairs. "What's that?" asked the lead operator. "You threatened children." Sarah's hand found the letter opener in her pocket, thumb settling on its balance point. In her mind, she was already calculating trajectories, timing, the sequence of movements that would turn her from captive to hunter in the span of 3 seconds. 20 years in special operations, 238 confirmed kills. You think we don't know what you're capable of? You know what I was capable of. You have no idea what I'm capable of now. They'd reached the first-floor landing. Through the stairwell windows, Sarah could see more SUVs arriving in the parking lot. Not backup for the assault team. These vehicles had different configurations, different markings barely visible through tinted windows. FBI. Her emergency message had gotten through. The lead operator noticed her glance toward the windows. "Your government friends won't help you, Ghost. This operation has official sanction." Sarah's blood chilled. If these operators were working with government approval, it meant someone in Washington had decided she was more valuable dead than alive, or someone had convinced them she posed a national security threat. "What did you tell them?" "That the Ghost of Kandahar has been selling classified information to foreign intelligence services. That a terrorist cell is planning to use her knowledge of American military tactics in an operation on domestic soil. That eliminating her is a matter of national security." Sarah understood now. Someone had manufactured a case against her, created evidence that would justify her elimination. The operators believed they were serving their country by removing a traitor. The FBI response would be designed to capture her alive for interrogation, not realizing they were walking into a trap set by the same people who'd sent the assault team. "You're being played," Sarah said as they reached the first floor. "I've been teaching kindergarten for 3 years. I haven't had contact with any foreign intelligence services." That's exactly what a deep cover asset would say. They moved toward the building's rear exit, away from the main entrance where FBI vehicles were now visible. Sarah realized this was her last chance to act before they got her away from the school and the children she'd sworn to protect. Her fingers tightened on the letter opener as they approached the exit door. The explosive paperweight would create enough chaos to disorient the operators and give her the tact advantage she needed. But detonating it inside the school risked structural damage that could harm students and staff. Sarah made her choice. As the lead operator reached for the exit door, Sarah spun with liquid precision, the letter opener leaving her hand in a perfect arc that took the man in the throat. Simultaneously, she rolled left, using the stairwell railing as cover, while her other hand found the modified stapler. The second operator was bringing his rifle around when Sarah's makeshift projectile caught him center mass, the small explosive charge in the stapler's modification creating enough kinetic energy to penetrate body armor. He dropped instantly. The woman operator was faster, more experienced. Her rifle was already trained on Sarah's position when the explosive paperweight left Sarah's hand, not aimed at the operator, but at the ceiling above her. The small charge brought down acoustic tiles and lighting fixtures, creating a cloud of debris and dust that obscured vision and disrupted targeting. Sarah moved through the chaos like smoke, her body remembering movements that had kept her alive through 4 combat deployments. The woman operator was firing blind now, her shots going wide as Sarah closed the distance between them. The ceramic owl from her classroom appeared in Sarah's hand, the one with the hidden blade that was sharp enough to cut through Kevlar if applied with sufficient force and precision. The woman operator's body armor covered her torso, but left the neck exposed, a vulnerability that Sarah exploited with surgical efficiency. 3 operators down in less than 15 seconds. Sarah stripped weapons and ammunition from the bodies, her hands moving with practiced efficiency. The HK-416s were familiar. She'd used similar weapons in Afghanistan. The tactical gear included communication equipment that would let her monitor any additional threats. Her phone buzzed with a text message from an unknown number. Impressive, but we're not done yet. Sarah's blood ran cold. She activated the communication equipment she'd taken from the operators and immediately hearing multiple voices coordinating on tactical frequencies. Team Alpha down. Repeat, Team Alpha is down. Team Bravo moving to secondary positions. Team Charlie has eyes on FBI response. Engage on my mark. Sarah realized with growing horror that the assault on the school was only the beginning. The real operation was larger, more complex. The FBI agents arriving to help were walking into an ambush, and she was the only person in position to warn them. But warning the FBI would mean leaving the school and the children inside. It would mean trusting that local law enforcement could protect 23 kindergartners from whatever additional threats might be lurking in the building. Sarah's tactical mind calculated rapidly. Multiple teams suggested a force of at least 12 operators. She'd eliminated 3, leaving 9 still in play. The FBI response team was probably 6 to 8 agents, walking into a trap without knowing they were outgunned and outmaneuvered. She thought about Marcus, Emma, David, Lily, and the 19 other children huddled in her classroom, trusting that she would come back for them. She thought about Mrs. Patterson's first graders and all the other students throughout the building who needed protection. Then she thought about the FBI agents whose only crime was responding to an emergency call, about to be slaughtered by operators who believed they were serving their country. Sometimes being a hero meant making impossible choices. Sometimes protecting some people meant failing to protect others.
Sarah Chen, kindergarten teacher, would have stayed in the building to protect her students. Staff Sergeant Chen, the Ghost of Kandahar, understood that the greater threat was outside, and the greater good required her to engage it. She moved toward the exit, weapon ready, prepared to become death incarnate one more time. Because sometimes, love looked like becoming a monster so that innocence could survive another day. The late afternoon sun cast long shadows across the parking lot as Sarah emerged from the rear exit of Sunshine Elementary. Through her acquired tactical radio, she could hear the coordinated movements of at least 2 additional teams positioning themselves around the FBI vehicles. The agents were walking into a carefully orchestrated killing field, and they had no idea. Team Bravo confirmed positioning. Bravo in position, southwest corner. Clear fields of fire on federal response. Charlie team, report. Charlie positioned on main access road. Federal vehicles stopped at checkpoint Alpha. Sarah moved along the building's perimeter, using her knowledge of the school grounds to approach the ambush zone from an unexpected angle. The playground equipment provided intermittent cover as she closed distance on Team Bravo's position. 2 operators had concealed themselves behind the maintenance building with clear lines of sight to the parking lot where FBI vehicles were staging. Through her scope, acquired from the first operator she'd eliminated, Sarah could see Agent Martinez, the FBI's local counterterrorism specialist, coordinating with what appeared to be 6 additional agents. She'd worked with Martinez briefly during a joint training exercise 2 years ago, back when she was still transitioning from military to civilian life. He was competent, experienced, but he was preparing for a hostage situation, not a military ambush. Sarah's radio crackled again. All teams, stand by. Federal agents moving toward building. Weapons free on my command. She had perhaps 30 seconds before the shooting started. Preparing and narrating this type of story takes us long efforts and hard work. So if you are enjoying the story, please consider subscribing to our channel. Sarah's mind fell into the cold clarity that had made her legendary in Afghanistan. The playground monkey bars provided an elevated firing position with excellent angles on both Team Bravo operators. The distance was approximately 150 meters, a trivial shot for someone who'd routinely engaged targets at 10 times that range. Her first shot took the Team Bravo sniper through the head before he could acquire Agent Martinez in his sights. The second operator spun toward her position, but Sarah was already adjusting fire, her second shot catching him center mass as he tried to bring his rifle around. Team Bravo down! Bravo team down! We have hostile sniper fire from the playground area. Sarah was already moving, using the confusion to relocate before return fire could find her position. The tactical radio exploded with activity as the remaining operators tried to coordinate a response to an unexpected threat. Charlie team, can you acquire the sniper? Negative. Too much cover and concealment. Recommend we abort and extract. Negative on abort. Primary target is still in play. All teams converge on school building. Sarah realized that despite eliminating 5 operators, the mission was still active. Someone wanted her dead badly enough to sacrifice multiple teams of expensive mercenaries. The question was, who had that kind of resources and motivation? Her phone buzzed with another text. You're only delaying the inevitable, Ghost. We know about your students. We know about your apartment. We know about your book club and your yoga classes, and the veterinarian you've been trying to work up the courage to ask out. Surrender now, or everyone you care about becomes a target.
The message hit Sarah like incoming fire. These people hadn't just found her, they'd mapped her entire civilian life, identified everyone she'd come to care about in her 3 years of trying to be normal. Dr. Rodriguez at the animal shelter, who'd become one of her closest friends. The members of her Tuesday book club, who'd welcomed her without question. Even David Martinez, the shy high school English teacher who brought her coffee every Thursday and shared her love of obscure poetry. All of them were now potential casualties in a war she thought she'd left behind. Sarah's training warred with her conscience. The tactically sound decision was to extract immediately, disappear into whatever identity the Pentagon's Ghost Protocol would provide, and let these people hunt shadows while she started over somewhere else. New name, new life, new chance to build something peaceful. But that meant abandoning 23 children who trusted her, and abandoning innocent civilians who'd committed no crime except becoming part of her life. Through her earpiece, Sarah heard the FBI agents coordinating their approach to the building. Agent Martinez was smart enough to realize something was wrong. The radio chatter from eliminated operators had probably been intercepted by federal monitoring equipment. But even knowing it was a trap, they couldn't abandon the children inside. Control, this is Martinez. We have confirmed hostile forces on scene with military-grade equipment, requesting immediate backup and tactical support. Martinez, be advised that target is classified as extremely dangerous. Former special operations with 200+ confirmed kills. Approach with extreme caution. Sarah winced at hearing her own statistics broadcast over federal channels. Even 3 years later, her reputation preceded her. But she also noticed something interesting in the federal response. They were treating her as the primary threat, not as a potential victim. Someone had convinced the FBI that she was the problem, not the solution. Her tactical radio crackled, "All teams, priority shift. Federal agents are now secondary targets. Primary objective remains elimination of Chen. She's demonstrated active capability and is confirmed armed and mobile." Sarah processed this information with growing alarm. The operators were willing to engage federal agents, but their primary mission was killing her. That level of commitment suggested either a very personal grudge or a very large paycheck. Given the sophistication of their intelligence and equipment, she suspected the latter. Moving through the shadows cast by the school building, Sarah worked her way toward the main parking lot where the FBI vehicles were clustered. If she could reach Agent Martinez and convince him that she was an asset rather than a threat, they might be able to coordinate a defense of the building. But first, she had to neutralize the remaining operators who were positioning themselves for ambush. Team Charlie was positioned along the main access road, using civilian vehicles as cover while they waited for FBI agents to advance. Sarah approached from the south, using drainage ditches and landscaping to mask her movement. The afternoon sun was behind her, making her harder to spot while backlighting potential targets. The first Charlie operator never saw her coming. Sarah's blade, taken from the ceramic owl, found the gap between his body armor and helmet with surgical precision. The second operator turned at the sound of his partner falling, but Sarah's acquired rifle was already trained on his position. Her shot was clean, quiet, and immediately fatal. "Charlie team, report status." Silence. "Charlie team, do you copy?" Sarah keyed the radio herself, pitching her voice low and hoping the tactical frequency would distort it enough to buy her a few seconds. "Charlie team repositioning to cover south approach." "Copy, Charlie. All teams, be advised Ghost is active and extremely dangerous. She's taken down both Bravo and Alpha teams. Recommend immediate extraction." "Negative on extraction. Mission priority remains unchanged. Target must be eliminated." Sarah was beginning to understand the scope of what she was facing. This wasn't just a revenge operation or a foreign intelligence grab. Someone with significant resources was willing to sacrifice multiple teams of highly trained operators to ensure her death. The level of commitment suggested either a personal vendetta from someone with unlimited funds or government operation that had been classified beyond the knowledge of responding FBI agents. Either way, the children in Sunshine Elementary were caught in the middle of something that had nothing to do with them and everything to do with choices Sarah had made in another life, in another war, in service to a country that might now consider her expendable. Her phone rang. "Agent Martinez." "Chen, this is FBI Special Agent Martinez. We need to talk." "I'm listening," Sarah replied, maintaining her position while scanning for additional threats. "We have credible intelligence that you've been compromised by foreign assets. You need to surrender immediately for your own protection and the protection of those children." "Agent Martinez, with respect, your intelligence is wrong. I'm not the threat here. The people trying to kill me are using you as backup. They want me dead, and they're willing to eliminate federal agents to make it happen. Chen, I understand this is a stressful situation, but his words were cut off by the sharp crack of sniper fire. Sarah watched through her scope as Agent Martinez dropped behind his vehicle, a bullet hole appearing in the windshield where his head had been a second earlier. The remaining operators had initiated their endgame. Sarah keyed her radio, broadcasting on the frequency she knew the FBI was monitoring. Federal agents, this is Chen. You have hostile snipers positioned on the school roof and in the tree line west of the parking lot. I count at least 4 remaining targets with automatic weapons and designated marksman capability. I am not your enemy. Repeat, I am not your enemy. Agent Martinez's voice came back immediately. Chen, can you confirm your position? Southeast corner of the building. I have eyes on 2 federal agents pinned down behind vehicles. I can provide covering fire if you need to reposition. There was a pause. Then, Chen, be advised that we have standing orders to consider you extremely dangerous. Agent Martinez, I taught your niece Emma in kindergarten last year. She wrote a story about wanting to be like her uncle Carlos when she grows up. Right now, I have 23 5-year-olds hiding in my classroom, trusting me to keep them safe. I'm not your enemy. Another pause, longer this time. Sarah could almost hear him processing the information, reconciling the woman who taught his niece with the classified file that painted her as a national security threat. What do you need, Chen? Time and ammunition. These operators are professionals, but they're not prepared for a coordinated defense. If we can pin them down long enough for your backup to arrive, we can end this without losing any more lives. Copy that. What's your assessment of remaining hostile forces? Sarah's training took over, providing the tactical analysis that could save lives. At least 4 confirmed hostiles. Sniper on the school roof, northeast corner. Automatic weapons team in the tree line approximately 200 meters west of your position. Unknown number of additional operators potentially inside the building. They have military-grade equipment and training, but they're operating under mission constraints that prioritize my elimination over tactical efficiency. Meaning? Meaning they'll take unnecessary risks to kill me. We can use that against them.
Agent Martinez's voice carried the crisp authority of someone making command decisions under fire. Chen, I'm authorizing you to provide support to federal operations under emergency protocols. Can you neutralize the roof sniper? Sarah was already adjusting her position, acquiring the target through her scope. The sniper was well concealed, but his muzzle flash from the shot at Martinez had given away his location. At 400 meters with a crosswind, it would be a challenging shot with an unfamiliar rifle. In Afghanistan, it would have been routine. Sniper neutralized in 3, 2, 1. Sarah's shot took the roof sniper through the scope of his own rifle, the bullet traveling through the optic and into his brain with the kind of precision that had made her a legend among American forces and a nightmare for enemy combatants. "Holy shit," came Agent Martinez's voice. "Confirm hostile sniper down." "Confirmed. Moving to engage automatic weapons team in the tree line." As Sarah repositioned for her next engagement, she thought about the children still hiding in her classroom, still trusting that their teacher would come back for them. She thought about the promise she'd made, that she wouldn't let anyone hurt them. Some promises were worth keeping no matter what they cost, even if the price was becoming a killer again, even if it meant never being able to go back to the simple peace of teaching kindergarten. Some things were worth more than personal redemption. The response came immediately. "No terms, Ghost. You have something that belongs to our client, and you're going to give it back before you die." Something that belonged to their client. Sarah's mind raced through possibilities. In her 4 deployments, she'd eliminated 238 confirmed targets. Any one of them could have had family, friends, or allies with enough resources to fund this kind of operation. But the reference to something she possessed suggested this wasn't just revenge, it was retrieval. "What am I supposed to have?" she broadcast back. "Flash drive. Kandahar operation, November 2021. You took it from Lieutenant Colonel Harrison before you put a bullet in his head." Sarah's world tilted on its axis. Lieutenant Colonel James Harrison had been her final target in Afghanistan, an American officer who'd been selling intelligence to Taliban forces.
The shot had been authorized at the highest levels, a classified operation to eliminate a traitor before he could do more damage to American forces. She'd never told anyone about the flash drive. She'd found it in Harrison's personal effects after confirming the kill, a small device that contained detailed intelligence on American force positions, patrol routes, and planned operations. Instead of turning it over to her commanding officers, Sarah had kept it as insurance, evidence that her final kill had been justified, protection against anyone who might later question her actions. For 3 years, that flash drive had sat in a safety deposit box in Arlington, Virginia. She'd told herself it was just paranoia, the inability of a soldier to completely trust the system she'd served. Now she realized it might have been the smartest decision of her life. "Harrison was a traitor," Sarah broadcast. "That flash drive proves it. Harrison was working for us. That flash drive contains information that could compromise ongoing operations. Our client wants it back." The implications hit Sarah like incoming artillery. Harrison hadn't been selling intelligence to the Taliban. He'd been feeding information to American intelligence assets. The treason had been deep cover work, and she had assassinated an American spy based on incomplete information, which meant someone in the American government had authorized the killing of their own asset and was now willing to eliminate her to cover up the mistake. "Agent Martinez," Sarah said in her phone, "I need you to listen very carefully. This operation isn't what you think it is. These aren't foreign operators or revenge seekers. They're working for someone in our own government who wants to bury a mistake that got an American intelligence asset killed." "Chen, what are you talking about?" "I can't explain everything over an open channel, but you need to know that the people trying to kill me aren't the enemy. The enemy is whoever sent them." Agent Martinez's response was interrupted by the distinctive crack of rifle fire from inside the school building. Sarah's heart stopped as she recognized the acoustic signature, shots fired on the second floor, in the area where her classroom was located. "Martinez, I'm going back inside. Those children are my responsibility." "Chen, wait." But Sarah was already moving, abandoning her concealed position and sprinting toward the building's rear entrance. The operators in the tree line opened fire immediately, their bullets chewing up asphalt and brick around her as she reached the door. Inside, the hallways echoed with gunfire and shouting. Sarah moved through the building like a ghost. Her intimate knowledge of its layout gave her advantages that the operators couldn't match. She knew which stairs creaked, which hallways had the best acoustics, which doors could be opened silently. The sounds of combat were coming from the second floor, but not from her classroom. Room 14, Mrs. Patterson's first-grade class.
Sarah reached the second-floor stairwell and heard voices she recognized. Mrs. Patterson pleading with someone, children crying in terror, and the cold, professional tones of operators coordinating their search. "Where is Sarah Chen's classroom?" demanded a male voice. I can't." Mrs. Patterson's voice was shaking with fear. "Room 12, said another voice. "Mr. Rodriguez, the principal. But she's not there. The children are alone." Sarah's rage was cold, surgical, focused with the precision that had made her legendary. These people had invaded her school, threatened her colleagues, and terrorized children to get to her. They'd made it personal. Moving with fluid silence, Sarah positioned herself at the end of the hallway where she could see into room 14. 3 operators had corralled Mrs. Patterson's 24 first-graders into a corner while questioning her teacher. The children were crying, some calling for their parents, others clinging to Mrs. Patterson's legs. Sarah's ceramic blade found the first operator's neck before he realized she was in the room. The second operator spun toward the movement, but Sarah had already dropped and rolled, coming up behind him with her acquired rifle. Her shot was point-blank, center mass, immediately fatal. The third operator had better training and faster reflexes. He grabbed Mrs. Patterson, using her as a human shield while pressing his sidearm to her temple. "Back off, Ghost, or the teacher dies." Sarah's rifle never wavered, trained on the 3-inch gap between Mrs. Patterson's ear and the operator's head. At 15 feet, with an unfamiliar weapon, it was a difficult shot that could easily result in Mrs. Patterson's death. In Afghanistan, Sarah wouldn't have hesitated. Acceptable casualties in service of mission completion.
But this wasn't Afghanistan. Mrs. Patterson wasn't a soldier who'd accepted the risks of combat. She was a first-grade teacher whose only crime was showing up to work on the wrong day. "Let her go," Sarah said. "Your fight is with me. Your fight is with our client. Drop your weapon and surrender, or I start executing teachers and students until you comply." Sarah saw the truth in his eyes. He would do exactly what he threatened. Professional killers who used children as leverage had crossed moral lines that couldn't be uncrossed. There would be no negotiation, no mercy, no consideration for innocent lives. There was only the mathematics of violence and the precision required to apply it correctly. Sarah's shot took the operator through his right eye, the bullet traveling at an angle that avoided Mrs. Patterson entirely. The man dropped instantly, his weapon clattering harmlessly to the floor. Mrs. Patterson collapsed to her knees, sobbing with relief and terror. 24 first-graders stared at Sarah with a mixture of awe and confusion, trying to process what they'd just witnessed. "It's okay," Sarah said, though she knew it wasn't. These children had just watched her kill 3 people with clinical efficiency. The trauma would follow them for years, maybe forever. "You're safe now." Her radio crackled. "Team Delta down. Repeat, Team Delta is down. Ghost has breached the building and is actively engaging our forces." Sarah helped Mrs. Patterson to her feet, guiding her toward the door. "Take the children to the first floor, away from the windows. Find a room you can barricade and wait for the FBI." "Sarah, what's happening? Who were those men?"
"People from my old life," Sarah replied. "People who can't let the past stay buried." Mrs. Patterson searched her face with the kind of recognition that came from working alongside someone for 3 years. "You were military." "Yes." You were very good at it." Sarah nodded, unable to find words that could bridge the gap between the woman who'd helped her with bulletin boards and the woman who'd just killed 3 people without hesitation. "Go," Sarah said. "Keep the children safe." As Mrs. Patterson led her students toward the stairwell, Sarah turned back toward the hallway that led to her own classroom. Her radio was alive with chatter from the remaining operators, their voices carrying the tension of professionals who'd underestimated their target. "How many teams has she eliminated?" "Alpha, Bravo, Charlie, and Delta, 8 operators down." This was supposed to be a simple extraction. Nothing about the Ghost of Kandahar was ever simple. Sarah smiled grimly. Her reputation had preceded her, but reputations were built on past performance. These operators had studied her military record, but they didn't understand what 3 years of teaching kindergarten had added to her skill set. Patience, the ability to anticipate behavior patterns, the willingness to sacrifice anything to protect children. And most importantly, the understanding that sometimes being a monster was the only way to keep monsters away from innocence. Her classroom door was exactly as she'd left it, locked, barricaded, secured. Through the small window, she could see 23 small figures huddled in the reading corner, exactly where she told them to stay. Emma saw her first, her face lighting up with relief and joy. "Miss Chen came back!" The other children looked up, their faces showing the trust that had never wavered despite the sounds of gunfire and chaos outside their door. They'd believed she would return, and she had. Sarah unlocked the door and slipped inside, immediately resecuring the deadbolt. 23 children surrounded her, small hands reaching for hugs, voices talking over each other as they shared their fear and relief. "We were so scared, Miss Chen. We heard loud noises. David thought you weren't coming back, but I told him you promised." Sarah knelt on the alphabet carpet, gathering as many children as she could into her arms. Their warmth and trust felt like absolution for every life she'd taken to reach this moment. "I always keep my promises," she said, and meant it. Her phone buzzed with the text from Agent Martinez. "Building secure. How many hostiles eliminated?" She typed back, 8 confirmed down, unknown number remaining.
Children safe in room 12. The response came quickly. FBI tactical team en route. Maintain position until all clear. Sarah looked around her classroom, at the finger painting still drying on the tables, at the motivational posters she'd hung with such hope for the future, and the ceramic owls that had hidden the tools of her former trade. This room represented everything she'd tried to become and everything she'd been forced to remember. "Miss Chen?" Marcus whispered. "Are you really a soldier like my daddy?" Sarah met his eyes, seeing in them the same trust and confusion that had defined her 3 years of teaching. How do you explain to a 5-year-old that sometimes good people have to do terrible things? How do you bridge the gap between bedtime stories and battlefield reality? "I used to be," she said finally. "A long time ago, before I became your teacher." "Did you keep people safe?" Sarah thought about 238 confirmed kills, about Lieutenant Colonel Harrison and the flash drive that had started this nightmare, about the operators she'd eliminated today to protect her students. "I tried to," she said, "and I'm still trying to." The all-clear came at 4:47 p.m., nearly 3 hours after the first gunshot had shattered the normalcy of a Tuesday afternoon at Sunshine Elementary. Agent Martinez's voice echoed through the building's intercom system. "All staff and students, this is FBI Special Agent Martinez. The threat has been neutralized. Please remain in your current positions while we conduct a final sweep of the building." Sarah remained with her students, 23 5-year-olds who had somehow maintained their faith in her throughout the longest afternoon of their young lives. Parents were already gathering in the school parking lot, held back by federal agents and local police, while investigators processed what would undoubtedly become a national news story. A kindergarten teacher with a classified military background had eliminated 8 professional operators to protect her students. The media would have a field day. Agent Martinez arrived at her classroom door 30 minutes later, accompanied by 2 other federal agents and what appeared to be a military officer in civilian clothes. Through the window, Sarah could see the grim expressions of people who were still processing what had happened. "Miss Chen," Emma tugged at her sleeve, "are those people going to take you away?" The question hit Sarah like a physical blow. In all her tactical planning, she'd focused on keeping her students safe from immediate physical danger. She hadn't considered what would happen afterward, when federal investigators needed to understand how a kindergarten teacher had possessed the skills to single-handedly eliminate a team of professional killers. "I don't know, sweetheart," Sarah replied honestly. Agent Martinez knocked on the door, his voice muffled but audible. "Chen, we need to talk. Can you step outside?" Sarah looked around her classroom one more time, at the children's artwork covering the walls, at the reading corner where they'd huddled together in trust and fear, at the ceramic owls that would never look innocent again. This room had been her sanctuary for 3 years, the place where she'd learned to build lives instead of ending them. She was about to lose it forever. "Children, I need to go talk to some people about what happened today. Mrs. Patterson is going to come stay with you until your parents arrive." "Will you come back tomorrow?" asked David, his voice small and worried. "I don't know if I'll be able to come back tomorrow, but I want you to remember something important. What happened today wasn't your fault, and you were all incredibly brave. Sometimes scary things happen in the world, but there are always good people who will protect you. Your parents, the police, your teachers, we all care about keeping you safe." Marcus raised his hand as if he were asking a question during math time. "Miss Chen, are you in trouble because you protected us?" The innocence of the question broke something inside Sarah's chest. How do you explain to a 5-year-old that the world punishes people for having the skills necessary to keep children alive? Sometimes grown-ups have to make very difficult decisions, and sometimes those decisions have consequences that are hard to understand. Sarah stood and walked to the door, her hand hesitating on the deadbolt. Once she opened it, there would be no going back to the simple life she'd built.
The FBI would want answers about her military background, her classified operations, the flash drive that had somehow triggered this attack. The media would dig into her past, exposing the carefully constructed identity she'd used to blend into suburban normalcy.
She opened the door. Agent Martinez stood in the hallway with two other agents and the civilian-dressed military officer. His expression was carefully neutral, the face of a professional trying to process information that didn't fit standard categories. "This Chen," he said formally, "this is Agent Williams from the FBI's Counterterrorism Division and Agent Foster from Internal Security. The gentleman in civilian clothes is Colonel Davidson from the Pentagon Special Access Programs Office." Sarah stepped into the hallway, closing the classroom door behind her. Through the small window, she could see Mrs. Patterson entering to stay with her students. The normalcy of it, a teacher caring for children while adults handled the complicated aftermath, felt surreal after the violence of the past few hours. "Agent Martinez," Sarah said, "before we begin, I need to know, are my students safe?" "The building is secure. All children and staff are accounted for. 8 hostile operatives eliminated, no civilian casualties." "Thank you." Colonel Davidson stepped forward, his bearing unmistakably military despite his civilian attire. "Miss Chen, we need to discuss your service record and the events that led to today's attack." "Colonel, with respect, I've been out of the military for 3 years. I'm a kindergarten teacher." "A kindergarten teacher who just eliminated 8 special operations-trained mercenaries using improvised weapons and tactical knowledge that's classified above your former security clearance level." Sarah met his gaze steadily. "I protected my students using whatever means necessary. That's what teachers do." Agent Williams consulted a tablet, her voice carrying the crisp authority of someone accustomed to dealing with classified materials. "Ms. Chen, we've reviewed your military service record. 4 deployments to Afghanistan, 238 confirmed kills as a designated marksman, multiple commendations for valor under fire. Your final operation involved the elimination of Lieutenant Colonel James Harrison on November 15, 2021. Harrison was identified as a traitor selling intelligence to Taliban forces," Sarah replied carefully. "That's what you were told," Colonel Davidson said. "The truth is more complicated." "Meaning?" "Lieutenant Colonel Harrison was running a deep cover operation to identify Taliban intelligence networks. His apparent treason was actually authorized psychological warfare designed to feed false information to enemy forces while gathering intelligence on their command structure." The words hit Sarah like incoming fire. She'd spent 3 years carrying the weight of 238 kills, but she'd always believed each one was justified, necessary, in service of protecting American forces and Afghan civilians. The knowledge that her final target had been an American hero instead of a traitor rewrote the narrative she'd built around her military service. "Someone gave me false intelligence," Sarah said, her voice deadly quiet. "Someone wanted Harrison eliminated and used you to do it," Colonel Davidson confirmed. "The question is who and why they're willing to kill you to keep it secret." Agent Foster spoke for the first time, his voice carrying the weight of internal investigations and buried secrets. "Miss Chen, where is the flash drive you recovered from Harrison's personal effects?" Sarah's tactical instincts screamed danger. These people knew too much about an operation that was supposed to be classified beyond their clearance levels. Either they were part of the conspiracy that got Harrison killed, or they were investigating it. "What flash drive?" "The one that contains evidence of who really ordered Harrison's assassination, the one that 8 professional killers died trying to recover today." Sarah studied their faces, looking for tells, inconsistencies, anything that would indicate whether these federal agents could be trusted. In Afghanistan, the wrong choice about who to trust usually meant death. Here, it might mean something worse, the exposure of corruption that went to the highest levels of American intelligence. "Even if such a flash drive existed," Sarah said carefully, "what makes you think I would still have it?" Colonel Davidson's expression softened slightly. "Because you're the kind of soldier who keeps insurance policies. Because you knew something was wrong about the Harrison operation.
even if you couldn't prove it at the time. And because you're still alive, which means you have leverage that someone desperately wants to eliminate. Through the classroom window, Sarah could see her students sitting in their usual circle time formation, listening to Mrs. Patterson read a story. The normalcy of the scene felt like a glimpse of a life she was rapidly losing. The simple piece of teaching children, helping them learn and grow, building futures instead of ending lives. If I hypothetically had evidence that proved Harrison was murdered by American operatives, Sarah said, what would happen to that evidence? That depends, Agent Martinez replied, on whether you trust the FBI to do its job or whether you think the corruption goes deeper than field operations. What's your assessment, Agent Martinez? My assessment is that 8 professional killers tried to murder 23 kindergarten students to get to you. That level of ruthlessness suggests someone with unlimited resources and no moral boundaries. In my experience, that describes certain elements within our own intelligence community more accurately than it describes foreign operatives. Sarah made her decision. There's a safety deposit box in Arlington. Bank of America branch on Wilson Boulevard, box 1247. The key is hidden in the ceramic owl on my classroom desk, the blue one with the chip on its left wing. Agent Foster was already moving toward the classroom door. We'll need to secure that evidence immediately. Agent Foster, Sarah called. If that flash drive disappears into a classified file and this whole incident gets buried under national security concerns, those children in my classroom will never be safe. Someone powerful enough to order Harrison's assassination and fund today's attack won't stop just because you recovered their evidence. What are you suggesting? Colonel Davidson asked. I'm suggesting that some secrets are too dangerous to keep. That flash drive contains evidence of corruption at the highest levels of American intelligence. The people responsible need to be exposed and prosecuted, not transferred to different departments with their security clearances intact. Agent Williams exchanged glances with her colleagues. Ms. Chen, you're talking about potentially exposing classified operations that could damage national security. I'm talking about protecting children from people who are willing to murder them to cover up their crimes. In my experience, people who use kindergartners as leverage don't deserve the protection of classification levels. Through the hallway windows, Sarah could see media trucks arriving in the school parking lot. Local news, national networks, probably international coverage given the sensational nature of the story. A kindergarten teacher with a secret military background defeating professional killers to protect her students. It was the kind of narrative that captured public attention and refused to let go, which might be exactly what was needed. Agent Martinez, how long before this story goes public? It's already public. Local news is reporting a security incident at Sunshine Elementary. By tonight, every major network will have the basic facts. Armed intruders, federal response, no civilian casualties. But they don't have my background information yet. That's classified, Colonel Davidson said quickly. Your military service record is protected by... Colonel, my service record became unclassified the moment I used those skills in a public setting to save children. By tomorrow morning, every investigative journalist in the country will be digging into who Sarah Chen really is and how a kindergarten teacher acquired the ability to eliminate 8 professional operatives.
Sarah paused, letting the implications sink in. The question is whether they discover a patriotic American veteran who sacrificed her peaceful civilian life to protect innocent children, or whether they uncover a conspiracy that involves the murder of American intelligence assets and the attempted massacre of kindergarten students to cover it up. Agent Williams consulted her tablet again, probably calculating the political ramifications of various disclosure scenarios. What are you proposing? Full transparency.
Release my military service record, declassify the Harrison operation, and let the American people decide whether they want intelligence agencies that are willing to murder children to protect their mistakes. That's not how classification works, Colonel Davidson protested. That's not how classification is supposed to work, Sarah corrected. But sometimes protecting the public requires exposing the people who are supposed to protect the public. Her phone buzzed with a text message from an unknown number. The flash drive won't save you, Ghost. We have resources you can't imagine and patience you can't outlast. Everyone you care about will pay for your interference. Sarah showed the message to Agent Martinez. This is why classification and quiet investigations won't work. These people aren't going to stop. They'll come after my students, my colleagues, anyone who might have information about what happened today. Unless, Agent Foster prompted, unless they're exposed and prosecuted publicly. Unless the cost of continuing their operations becomes higher than the cost of accepting defeat. Sarah looked through the classroom window one more time, watching Mrs. Patterson help David with his shoelaces while Emma shared her crayons with Lily. Simple moments of kindness and learning that represented everything she'd hoped to protect by leaving the military behind. Those children trusted me to keep them safe. That's a promise that doesn't end when the immediate danger is over. If I have to sacrifice my privacy, my civilian life, even my freedom to make sure they're protected, that's a price I'm willing to pay. Even if it means you can never go back to teaching? Agent Martinez asked quietly. Sarah's throat tightened. Even then. Because sometimes love meant becoming a public figure instead of a private person. Sometimes it meant choosing truth over safety, exposure over protection. Sometimes it meant accepting that the life you'd built was the price of keeping the promise you'd made. 6 months later, Sarah Chen stood before a congressional hearing, her testimony broadcast live across every major network. The flash drive's contents had exposed a conspiracy reaching into the highest levels of the CIA, resulting in 17 arrests and a complete restructuring of oversight protocols. The Harrison operation was authorized by Deputy Director Marcus Webb to eliminate an asset who discovered Webb's financial ties to defense contractors. When Harrison threatened to expose the corruption, Webb ordered his assassination and used me as the unwitting weapon. In the gallery, she spotted familiar faces. Agent Martinez, who'd led the investigation, Mrs. Patterson, who'd testified about the school attack, and in the front row, 23 families whose children had been saved by their teacher's terrible skills. Emma Martinez waved shyly from her uncle's lap, wearing a t-shirt that read, "My teacher is a hero." After her testimony, Sarah walked outside to find Marcus waiting by the courthouse steps. Now 6 years old, he ran to her with the boundless energy of a child who'd learned that heroes came in unexpected forms. "Miss Chen, are you coming back to teach us?"
Sarah knelt down, gathering him into a hug that smelled like playground dirt and innocent trust. "I don't know yet, sweetheart, but I promise you this. Wherever I go, whatever I do, I'll always be someone who protects children."